Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Rise of the Phoenix, and this video is going to be the next iteration of my faction overview / deep dive videos. In this video, we're going to talk about Mordor, which is one of the best factions in the game. In my opinion, we'll talk about all of those reasons why. One quick note is any shoutouts, so people that have requested for me to do a shout out of them, I'm going to move those to the end of the videos in order to keep the introductions short and sweet. So with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and roll the intro here in a second. But first, if you enjoy my content, please do consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Welcome back, everyone. Let's get started and talk about Mordor's faction bonus. It's the Land of Darkness, which increases resource production by 5%. In my opinion, this is one of the better faction bonuses in the game, as it's going to help you for quite a long time. In the early game, in my experience at least, you really struggle for resources, even in the mid game, once you're trying to get 20 of 20 in like your conscription post barracks and take all of your unit buildings to 6 of 6, those things being very expensive, as well as staying on top of conscription. So having extra resources is pretty much an amazing thing for at least half of the season. If you are able to eventually make it to a significant number of 200 tiles, which gets more difficult in later seasons, then maybe it won't really matter because you kind of have infinite resources anyway. But for a very long time, this bonus is going to help you quite a bit, in my opinion. As for their tier 4 unit, I'll talk about them for a second. It is the Ravager. They have a large unit attribute, which means they take extra damage from some things, but in general, they will actually receive less damage from most enemy units. And they have Savagery, which is a really cool ability, in my opinion. Every single time they attack, actually, I think it's just a per round thing. So if they had Convener, I don't think it would trigger every attack. I think if they procced it, let's say use them on Witch King, if they procced their extra attack from Witch King's Convener, and they also have Savagery active, which lets them attack all enemy units. I do believe they would attack all enemy units with both attacks. I don't think you'd have to roll either way. At least that's the way it's worded here. So really cool ability that lets you hit all enemy units sometimes. These guys are basically souped up mountain trolls. However, they don't have the taunt. So if you're wanting to bring trolls for the taunt, do keep in mind that these guys do not have that ability. However, believe it or not, contrary to popular belief, these guys are actually very tanky. So if you do the math, even if you account for the fact that Master Throwers and Bow Knights are dealing 50% additional damage to Ravagers, even after accounting for that, these guys are almost as tanky as Crushers per command. And Crushers are one of the tankier evil units. So these guys get kind of a bad rap, in my opinion. People say, oh, Bow Knights and Master Throwers just shred them. Well, that's kind of true, but also a little bit of misinformation, in my opinion. There are tankier units that Evil has access to, particularly, if I look at my list over here, particularly the Dragoon and the Raiders, actually, believe it or not, as well as Fallen, if you have access to them, but that's for Angmar, so it doesn't really count. We're talking about Mordor here. So yeah, these guys are actually tankier than I think people think. The big downside of these guys is their speed is absolutely terrible, and they are ridiculously expensive and take forever to conscript. So do keep that in mind if you want to bring them in your armies. Your armies are going to crawl around the map, which in my opinion, for me, the way I like to play, I don't like slow units just for that reason. Like I tried using Ents one time just to test them, and I tried moving them like to a fort and on the very edge of my movement radius, and it was going to take like an hour and a half to go 50 tiles. And I was like, no, I'm just not using Ents. So you have to be careful if you're going to use these guys with your armies being slow, that you don't get bounced and things like that. Overall, I think it's an alright tier 4 unit. I don't think they're the worst. However, I also don't think that they are the best. I think there's much better tier 4 units out there. And the big drawback, too, while we're talking about that, is they don't have taunt. And taunt can be such a powerful effect when you build your army to take advantage of it. So I do think that is kind of another drawback as well. Mountain trolls being cheaper and can script faster, and they have the taunt. So that is that for the tier 4 unit overview. We'll talk about commanders real quick. And this is going to be, oh, look at that. I just got a new commander because this is a brand new account. It's going to be the same, I think, for all evil factions. I think evil has some very powerful commanders. I think that evil's commander choice is a bit more limited because they also have a bunch of bad commanders. As far as T1 commanders go, Khaldun is absolutely phenomenal. He is one of the best commanders in the game, in my opinion. Gorbag can be quite solid as well if you want to focus on orcs, and Grima is another very strong tier 1 option. If you're really needing a damage commander and you don't want to invest in alerts, or you just can't buy the 50 chests for whatever reason, Agzok would be an option for a pure damage commander. Moving on to tier 2 commanders, the biggest standouts in my opinion are Gothmog and Lurtz. Lurtz being one of the highest damage dealers in the game. Gothmog being very flexible. He can buff melee units. He's amazing with alchemists. If you need him for siege, you can respec him for that as well. I got trolled a little bit in my last evil video for not mentioning Zagrid. The reason I didn't mention Zagrid is because I wanted to focus on commanders that are primarily early game, and I don't think that I would really use Zagrid over some other options as far as taking tiles goes. However, if you're going to be ending up fighting Rohan and or Gondor, really just good factions in general, he can be quite powerful because he's good against cavalry commanders. And I will give another special shout out to the Shadow, an honorable mention I suppose you would call it. This guy at respect 5 with good gear actually performs very, very well. More and more people have been picking him up, and I've seen some really solid reports from the Shadow. As far as T3 commanders go, obviously the Witch King, probably still the best commander in the game. Sauron, a very, very strong commander as well. Certainly an S tier commander, all things considered. And specifically for taking tiles, Kirun is actually pretty good. However, I don't think you're going to get as much value out of Kirun in PvP as you would the Witch King or Sauron. So unless you are a major whale who is able to invest in multiple tier 3 commanders, I would definitely recommend picking either the Witch King or Sauron to invest in. Of the two, I think the Witch King is probably better. The only drawback is he's somewhat of a one-trick pony with Convener and Alchemists. Sauron, I think, is a bit more flexible in terms of the army compositions he can run. The big drawback with Sauron is that he can get pretty hard countered by anti-madness helmets, and if somebody has a heavily refined horseman's helm, makes their entire army immune to those early rounds of madness. That can really screw over Sauron's game plan. The other thing is that Sauron is a bit RNG based, meaning you have to have your madnesses hit in those early rounds, and you need those enemy units to actually attack their own army rather than attacking your army. However, I think with really good gear, the pure focus build of Sauron can be quite strong as well, rather than the madness build. But that is it for our commanders. In terms of recommended buildings, that is going to heavily be based on which commanders you want to use. Mordor has a very solid set of starting units. You can use these guys, particularly grunts and scouts, all the way up to 200 tiles. I don't really like cave trolls for taking tiles just because they are super expensive and they take a while to conscript. I mean, look at that, 7,800 grain. If we were to compare that to, say, a brute, 2,200, you can get almost 4 full commands of brutes for 1 command of trolls. So I don't really like them, at least early on, for taking tiles. Things do get better when you get mountain trolls, because They have that provoke ability. Cave trolls actually don't even taunt, which is another reason I'm not super fond of them. So yeah, grunts and scouts, very solid orc units there. So if you want to focus on orc commanders, definitely invest in those. If you want to go the evil men route with something like Khaldun, Kirun, Black Serpent, you get early access to the eastern quarters, and the mercenary yurt, even if you're going orcs, could be a very viable option for you to pick up as well. You also get relatively early access to the northern quarters. If you want to add some ranged damage into your army, you can easily run crushers, the orc crossbowmen, and raiders all the way up to 200 powered tiles, particularly if you have Gothmog, Mouth of Sauron, Grima, even Gorbag as your commanders that you've been focusing on to take advantage of those orc buffs. Reapers are probably my favorite unit in the game, even though I play good factions. I think these guys are absolutely crazy. I don't think that I would take the time and resources to access them early on, though, at least not for taking tiles. Like I said, I think you'll do just fine with either your orcs or your evil men, depending on what commanders you pick. The real downside of the Mordor starting quarters, or quarter order, whatever you want to call it, is that you get access to alchemists much later than other evil factions. This means that your Witch King, your Khamul, any commander that has that Ringwraith title and takes advantage of that Ringwraith title, they're going to be a little bit weaker early on, but it's not the end of the world. You can still get these pretty quickly, within a couple of days at least. But Mordor's normal quarters are perfectly awesome. Like I've been saying, you really don't have to crutch on alchemists like a faction like Isengard might have to. So really solid set of starting units there. And finally, another awesome thing about Mordor, we'll talk about their starting position on the map. They start in the southeastern corner of the map, and if we zoom in here, their starting location is quite awesome because in order to get into their heartland, you have to either capture the Black Gate, which is a 1k power structure, not an easy thing to do early on, or you have to take Minas Morgul and Cirith Ungol, Minas Morgul being another 1k structure. So if we go over here, we can see there is a path through this area, but you have to capture that to get to the other side. And even after capturing that, there's a road that dead ends into Cirith Ungol. So they are quite protected. The other way into Mordor is all the way on this part of the map, like as east as you can possibly go in order to get into the eastern wastes and come in that way. Luckily for Mordor, Rune is very not played. They're like the least popular faction by far in the game. So it's going to be pretty unlikely, in my opinion, that you're going to be facing down a powerful Rune faction. Mordor itself is one of the most popular factions, which is a reason that I recommend people who are new to the game want to start in Season 1 as evil. That's one of the reasons I tell them to play Mordor. Mordor is super popular, Rune not popular, which means you don't even really have to worry about this flank most of the time. And other than that, you're going to be contending with Gondor early on, which could be a problem as they are a very popular Season 2 faction in my experience. However, they're not going to be able to get into your heartland early on, which is good, but you probably will end up either allying them or fighting them over control of southern Ithilien and Harondor, and even eventually potentially Osgiliath. The reason being the ever-powerful Mumakil. Let me actually just do it this way rather than trying to randomly find a Mumakil. The ever-powerful Mumakil camps are in these areas. Mordor players want access to those for obvious reasons. If you don't ally with Gondor, Gondor is going to want to deny you access to those for obvious reasons. So Mordor and Gondor can be an extremely powerful alliance as long as they can trust each other. If Gondor makes that alliance, their entire western flank is safe. If Mordor makes it, Gondor's eastern flank is safe. Mordor's western flank is safe. Mordor's eastern flank is already safe most of the time because Rune is underpopulated. which really lets you focus on expanding north towards Dol Guldur, picking up your Muma camps. Gondor is able to then focus on controlling the western area that they start in, as well as in later seasons, potentially coming up into our north lands for Bree Riders, or even some type of epic backstab on Rohan with Mordor's help. And then the final thing I want to point out about the starting location for people that don't know, Mordor is quite close to what I consider to be the best area of land in the game. I mean, just look at all of these high-powered grain tiles. It really does not get any better than this. And if you don't want to travel all the way into Runesland, there's actually a hotspot as well to the north of Osgiliath. However, if you make an alliance with Gondor, they're probably going to say, hey man, this grain stuff is ours because you guys can go get grain from Rune. But if you opt to kill Gondor, you get this entire gold mine of farmland for yourself. And if we go back to Rune real quick, there's also a nice amount of resources on these islands over here as well that you're able to take advantage of. It's not quite as good as those grain areas, but it's still a pretty nice resource hotspot that Mordor is able to take advantage of. I think a fitting final shot for the video will be Mount Doom itself. Alright guys, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something useful. Let me know what you think about Mordor and Ravagers down in the comments below. Am I completely crazy for thinking that they're actually a viable unit, or do you think that they are quite good as well? I'll see you in the next one. Rise of the Phoenix, over and out.